The night was heavy with rain, and every drop that struck the window sounded like fate hammering a cruel decree. Naomi's chest ached as she whispered, "I was sold at 19, and now I belong to a man who never wanted me." Her voice cracked, and silence swallowed the confession. Across the dimly lit suite, Adrian stood near the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. The billionaire's gaze was cold, his words sharper than the storm outside. Adrian said, "This marriage isn't love. It's business, nothing more." Naomi's heart clenched, her dreams collapsing like glass underfoot. She wanted to scream, to claw back the dignity stripped from her, but her body betrayed her, trembling like a leaf caught in the gale. Her reflection in the mirror mocked her, dressed in silk and diamonds that felt more like chains than blessings. She closed her eyes, tasting salt, not from champagne but from the tears sliding down her face. The storm outside echoed her own, merciless and relentless. She thought of her mother's pleading eyes, the family debt that chained her fate. In the silence, she felt him step closer. The air thickened. Adrian whispered, low and unforgiving, "Don't mistake this union for affection." The words seared her, deeper than any blade could. The suite smelled of roses and smoke, the bitter perfume of luxury. Naomi tried to steady herself, her heart beat loud in her ears. She thought of her father's debts, the contracts signed with trembling hands, and the price of survival written in her name. The nightmarish truth gnawed at her. Adrian had not even looked at her as a bride, only as an object to settle a score. Naomi whispered, "You don't even see me." Adrian glanced at her, his tone smooth as glass but sharp enough to cut. Adrian said, "You're convenient, nothing more." Her body shivered. She wanted to despise him, yet some buried part of her yearned for warmth where none existed. The storm rattled the window, as if mocking her weakness. Naomi's reflection caught in the mirror again, her silk gown glowing in the dim light, her face young yet worn with sorrow. She felt ancient and small at once. Naomi asked, her voice a trembling plea, "What am I supposed to be in this?" His silence weighed more than any answer. It was a silence that suffocated, louder than the thunder roaring outside. Naomi sat at the edge of the bed, fingers curled into the sheets, as though clinging to sanity itself. The silk beneath her felt foreign, like ice against her skin. Adrian moved with precision, unbothered by her despair, pouring himself whiskey. The amber liquid shimmered under golden light. Naomi whispered, "Do you hate me that much?" Adrian smirked, not even turning to face her. Adrian said, "Hate requires feeling." His cruelty carved into her like glass. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to rise, to scream, to shatter the distance between them, but her body was locked in chains unseen. Every moment in that suite felt like drowning in velvet. Naomi looked at her gown, silk meant for a queen, but tonight it was a shroud. She thought of the girl she used to be, laughter echoing in simpler times, now silenced. The storm outside answered her thoughts with merciless thunder. The whiskey burned as Adrian sipped, his eyes fixed on the glass instead of her. Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. Naomi said, "I'm not furniture. I'm not your silence." He turned his head, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before the mask settled again. Adrian said, "You're here because choices were made. Accept that." Naomi's tears returned, not weak but defiant. Her chest rose with shallow breaths as she pushed herself to her feet. She felt the weight of silk and diamonds pressing down like shackles. The thunder outside rolled like a drumbeat of war, reminding her she wasn't safe, not even in her own skin. She looked into his eyes and saw a man carved by shadows, a man whose cruelty was armor. Naomi whispered, "Then I'll fight not to vanish inside it." The night stretched, cruel and endless. Naomi stood facing him, her resolve a fragile flame against his towering shadow. Adrian studied her with a gaze that could burn or freeze, and tonight it froze. Adrian said, "Strength doesn't matter here. Only obedience." Her heart cracked, yet she stood taller, refusing to fold. Naomi whispered, Then you'll see what it cost to break me." Silence followed, sharp and unyielding. Adrian lifted his glass once more, drinking as though her defiance was nothing but smoke in the storm. Naomi's body trembled, but her spirit surged with a vow unspoken. The storm outside thrashed against the glass as though it carried her fury. She knew then, this was not just a marriage. It was a battlefield. The bathroom hummed with the vent's soft drone, and Naomi pressed cool marble with shaking palms. Steam fogged a mirror like a veil she could not lift. She stared at herself and felt the ache bloom again. Naomi said, "If I disappear, no one wins." Her phone lit with a photo of her mother smiling in a thrifted dress. The memory tugged hard and refused to let go. Evelyn said, "You are more than what they paid for." The words rose from another year, another kitchen, where cardamom tea masked worry. Naomi traced the lip of a crystal glass and tried to breathe. She pictured a tiny apartment filled with sewing pins and bright scraps. She pictured mornings that tasted like hope. Naomi said, "I will not be a receipt." The storm outside lowered its voice to a steady hiss. She folded pain into resolve the way a seam is pressed flat. Adrian's silence sat behind the door like a locked safe. Naomi said, "I decide how I live inside this cage." The mirror cleared a little, and her face sharpened into focus. The memory opened like a door, and Naomi stepped into summer heat that tasted like sun. She and Layla shared a bus stop bench with chipped blue paint. Layla said, "You sew like the cloth is speaking." Naomi laughed then, light as linen on a line. She sketched dresses in a beat-up notebook and believed in wide futures. "Naomi," said one day, "I will walk my own runway." A wind gust flipped pages and fired her ambition higher. Layla said, "Promise you will not shrink for anyone." The promise lodged under her skin, tender and fierce. In the present, the sweet's cold air pressed against her shoulders. She felt the old vow reach for her like a hand in the dark. Naomi said, "I am still here, even if they try to price me." She closed her eyes and held the girl who dreamed. The phone rang twice before Layla answered with breathy worry. Layla said, "Tell me you are safe." Naomi stared at the rain and measured the truth. Naomi said, "I am not broken, only bent." The words steadied her spine. Layla said, "Bend toward yourself, not toward him." Naomi paced the length of the rug and watched lightning cut the city. She explained the contract, the debt, the calculated chill. Layla went quiet, then sharpened like a blade for her. Layla said, "Name what you want and move like it is law." Naomi let that settle into her bones. Naomi said, "I want my work, my voice, and my name." The storm answered with a low drum roll. Layla said, "Then write the rules inside your breath." The line clicked into silence, but the council stayed loud. The past arrived with hospital corridors and invoices that bred like ivy. Machines blinked while hope thinned to threads. Evelyn said, "We will keep a roof even if I sell my wedding ring." Naomi carried boxes, stitched nights, and hid her fear in seams. A sleek contract sat on their table like a silver-eyed serpent. The clauses glittered with elegant cruelty. Naomi said, "If I sign, you breathe without panic." Her mother covered her hands and shook. Evelyn said, "Love is not a ledger." The world answered with overdue notices and closing doors. Naomi signed anyway and felt a part of herself go quiet. She learned how silence can masquerade as duty. She folded that lesson like a pattern piece and packed it away. Back in the suite, Naomi opened a luggage pocket and drew out her sketchbook. The graphite smudges looked like roadmaps to a freer city. She flipped to a design with lines that curved like breath. Naomi said, "This is mine, untouched by any bargain." She set the book on the vanity and lifted her chin. She removed the diamond bracelet and let it fall like a verdict. The clink rang clean across the marble. Naomi said, "I will not worship cages dressed as gifts." She traced a seam in the sketch with steady fingers. Outside, the storm began to thin, more whisper than roar. She inhaled until her ribs made room for hope. Naomi said, I will leave a mark that money cannot erase. Morning crawled in gray and glass, and the sweet smelled like coffee and the fading ghost of rain. Naomi stood at the island, chin high, the diamond bracelet gone, the silence between them tight as thread. Adrian said, ground rules, and slid a folder across marble like a judge sliding a sentence. Naomi said, I am not a clause, and pushed it back with 2 fingers that refused to tremble. He watched, unreadable, then poured coffee, careful, controlled, as if touch itself could be audited. Adrian said, public unity, private distance, and the words placed furniture inside her ribs. Naomi said, I will speak for myself, even if the room is yours, and the air shifted its weight. He reached for a cup, their hands grazed, flash and flinch, heat washing forward, then snapping shut. Adrian said, do not mistake accidents for signals, but his breath hitched once and betrayed him. Naomi said, then watch me turn accidents into exits, and she took the folder and kept her name. Somewhere below, the city woke to sirens and light, and desire threaded the distance like wire. The car sliced through noon glare, and the city threw mirrors at their faces like questions. Naomi's fingers found the hem of her dress, and smoothed it flat like a plan. Adrian said smile for 30 minutes, and the order sat beside her like unwanted luggage. Naomi said, I will smile for myself, and lifted her chin until it felt like armor. Flashbulbs erupted when they stepped out, a storm of names, rumors, and hungry angles. A reporter asked about love, bright and cruel, and Naomi held her gaze until it dimmed. Adrian said, this marriage is private, and placed a hand at Naomi's back, shield and claim. The press surged. She staggered. His jacket moved around her like a wall built in a breath. Naomi said, do not pretend to care, and the words stung both of them more than planned. He bent close, voice low enough for skin, and said, I protect my assets. Naomi said, I am not inventory, and the cameras caught fire in her eyes and did not blink. The office smelled like steel and lemon, and windows gripped the skyline like a quiet threat. The board waited with tuxedo smiles and surgical pens. Cassandra said, we keep her silent and gracious, as if Naomi were a seasonal ad. Adrian said, she will attend select events, and did not look at Naomi for the verdict. Naomi said, I will attend my life, and laid her sketchbook on the table like a live wire. Cassandra's brow lifted, a blade waiting for a throat. Naomi said, I build beauty from scraps. That is not a scandal, and the room went still. Adrian's hand hovered over a page, and the air sparked with something almost gentle. He withdrew like a man from flame and said, this is not relevant to quarterly goals. Naomi said, my goals do not ask permission, and she took her book back whole. The boardroom glass reflected a woman who would not vanish, and that reflection refused to obey. In the lounge outside the boardroom, velvet chairs swallowed words that dared to breathe. Cassandra said, you are a headline they purchased to bury another headline. Naomi said, you assume I am for burying. I am for planting, and her voice did not break. Cassandra's smile cut neat and thin, a ruler edge dressed as kindness. She said, he will never choose you over the empire that built him. Naomi said, he does not have to choose for me to choose myself, and heat uncurled in her chest. Cassandra stepped closer, perfume crisp, eyes cold oceans behind perfect glass. She said, stay in frame, or we crop you out, and tapped the bracelet Naomi no longer wore. Naomi said, try to crop me, and let the absence glitter louder than diamonds. At the doorway, Adrian paused and watched 2 women refusing to bow. He said, we are late, and something unspoken dragged after the words like a shadow on wet streets. Night crawled back over the city, and the rooftop tasted like rain cooled to iron. Naomi stood at the ledge and felt the wind sow courage along her spine. Adrian said, do you always defy instructions? And his tone tried for boredom, missed and bled. Naomi said, instructions are not vows, and the sky echoed with silent applause. He stepped beside her, tie loosened, the empire on pause at his throat. Adrian said, "I was 19 when my father sold my first company," and the distance flickered. Naomi tasted the confession and turned toward him, startled by the bruise in it. She said, "Then you know the price of being currency," and the wind carried the truth clean. He looked down, jaw rigid, then softer, like a door remembering how to open. Adrian said, "Do not ask for what I cannot give," and the night held its breath. Naomi said, "I will not ask. I will take my life back," and the stars wrote new terms above them. Morning found a manila envelope tucked beneath Naomi's sketchbook, like a buried fuse. She slid the papers free and felt the room tilt. Legal ink spoke in polished knives. Naomi said, "Trust fund, annulment, untouched." The clause burned. A signature bled across the page in Adrian's precise hand. Adrian said, "After 30 days, you leave with control of your name." Her breath stumbled and steadied. Naomi said, "You planned my exit before my entrance." Thunder had gone, but its ghost lingered in her bones. Adrian stood in the doorway, collar unbuttoned, eyes guarded. He said, "I was 19 once, and bought 2. The admission cracked the air. Naomi said, "You did the unthinkable to keep me unbroken." The truth landed with the weight of a key. Silence clicked between them, like a locked briefcase. Adrian said, "Staying untouched keeps you clear of their claims." He did not blink. Naomi said, "Whose claims?" He answered, with a name that tasted like iron. Adrian said, "Cassandra wants proof you chased the empire." Naomi felt heat rise, then settle into ice. Naomi said, "You refused me to protect me and yourself." He looked away, as if the skyline might confess for him. Adrian said, "I refuse to turn anyone into currency again." The words shook quiet as old glass. Naomi said, "Then do not spend me in headlines." He nodded once, a small surrender that cost him pride. The city brightened without permission, as if clarity had found a window. The elevator delivered Naomi into a corridor that smelled like power disguised as citrus. Cassandra waited, with a smile honed for magazine covers. Cassandra said, "Transparency protects the brand." Naomi said, "Your brand trims off inconvenient women." Cassandra shifted a tablet and opened a folder of staged rumors. Cassandra said, "A romance narrative keeps markets calm." Naomi's pulse flattened into steel. Naomi said, "You orchestrated my sale to bury another scandal." Cassandra's eyes did not flinch. Cassandra said, "He needed quiet. You needed saving." The lie wore silk gloves. Naomi said, "You paid my father to sign faster." The corridor emptied of air. Cassandra said, "Everyone got what they wanted." Naomi felt the ground redraw itself beneath her feet. The past arrived wearing a thrift store suit and a shine of regret. Darius stood in the lobby as if he owned the echoes. Darius said, "I came to thank the man who saved our roof." Naomi tasted metal and memory. Naomi said, "You sold me like furniture." He shrugged with a smile that begged forgiveness and change. Darius said, "Debt is a flood. I kept you from drowning." The lie scratched like burlap. Adrian stepped from security shadows, eyes cold as audit steel. Adrian said, "Refunds come with receipts." Darius flicked a glance that slid off granite. Naomi said, "Did Cassandra pay you to hurry the sale?" His silence was an invoice. Darius said, "Money is money." Naomi felt the door close on whatever father once meant. The boardroom waited like a camera set to overexpose. Cassandra slid a press draft across polished wood. Cassandra said, "We pivot to philanthropy and romance." Naomi placed her palm on the draft and felt the heat of spin. Naomi said, "We pivot to truth." Adrian's jaw set like a locked safe, then eased. Adrian said, "We kill the romance angle." Cassandra's smile thinned to wire. Naomi said, announced the trust and the annulment clause. Silence clicked as if the room changed lenses. Cassandra said, "Markets dislike confession." Naomi said, "They hate leaks more." Adrian looked at Naomi as if she had mapped a clean exit. Adrian said, "We proceed on her terms." The Empire blinked, startled to find a new architect at the table. Backstage smelled like cables, sawdust and nerves sharpened to points. The press room hummed with microphones, a hive ready to sting. Naomi felt the lights through the curtain, hot and judging. Adrian stood beside her, tie straight, mask almost flawless. He said, "We lead with the trust announcement." She said, "We lead with the truth." A notification flashed on his phone and drained the color. He said, "The draft leaked with photos you never took." She tasted fury shaped like mercy and swallowed both. Cassandra stepped from the shadows with a smile set to win. "No," Cassandra said, "optics demand narrative." Naomi said, "Narrative demands honesty." Adrian looked between them, a bridge under siege. He said, "If we delay, the markets riot by noon." Naomi said, "If we lie, I riot by memory forever." The stage manager counted down with fingers like a metronome. Naomi lifted her chin and chose the blade with her name. She said, "We walk out, and I speak first." Adrian nodded, and a fault line shifted toward light. The curtain breathed as vents exhaled cool metal. Naomi pressed a palm to her ribs and felt courage knit. Adrian slid the phone away like a holstered weapon. He said, "Whatever you say, I will not contradict it." She heard the cost in that vow and refused to flinch. They stepped into flash and thunder that had nothing to do with weather. Naomi gripped the podium and let silence earn its keep. She said, "I was sold to erase a scandal not mine." Gasps moved like wind across grain. She said, "A trust exists, so I leave with my name intact." Cameras clicked like teeth in the dark. Cassandra smiled from the wings and waited to spin. Naomi said, "He refused me to keep me clear of their claims." Adrian's jaw shifted, and he did not look away. He said, "That is true." The room tilted, then steadied on truth's small axis. Naomi said, "Annulment terms protect my future work." "Ah?" A reporter asked, bright and reckless, "Is there love here?" Naomi said, "There is respect, and there is repair." Adrian said, "There will be accountability." Cassandra tried to cut in, voice honeyed and sharp. Naomi said, "No more scripts written over my skin." The lights burned, but heat became fuel. The green room exhaled the ache of fresh honesty. Naomi closed the door on the roar and faced the man who had refused and protected. She said, "You built a wall and called it mercy." Adrian said, "I built a wall because fire spreads." She said, "You never asked what I could survive." He said, "I remembered what I could not." He sat, hands open, as if petitioning a judge. Adrian said, "I chose humiliation over harm." She paced, the carpet capturing every storm in her legs. Naomi said, "You chose control that looked like care." He said, "I chose to keep you unclaimed by their narrative." The word there landed like gravel. Naomi said, "You do not get to crown yourself savior." He swallowed and let pride dissolve into air. Adrian said, "Then crown yourself and I will step back." She felt fury melt at the edges and harden again. Naomi said, "I will not belong to any empire, even yours." He nodded like a man agreeing to bleed. Cassandra arrived with a smile that promised clean fires. Cassandra said, "We salvage this with a charity gala tonight." Naomi said, "We salvage nothing with more costume." Cassandra lifted a glossy folder like a blade that gleamed. Cassandra said, "Sign here and we reframe you as muse." Naomi stepped closer and let the silence sharpen its teeth. She said, "You paid my father to hurry the sale." The smile cracked, then soldered itself too fast. Cassandra said, "He came cheap and fast." Adrian's voice cut from the doorway like a verdict. Adrian said, "You are finished here." Cassandra said, You would ruin your quarter to protect her pride. Naomi said, he is protecting the truth I started. Cassandra laughed, bright and empty. Naomi said, you wanted a puppet. I learned the strings. Adrian moved beside Naomi and did not touch. He said, security will see you out. Night rearranged the suite into a stage with no witnesses. Naomi stood by the window and watched the city breathe. Adrian stopped 2 steps behind, as if distance were law. He said, I wanted you, and I hated that I did. The confession shook like glass set on edge. Naomi said, I wanted to be wanted without chains. He said, I do not know how to love without contracts yet. The yet trembled in the air and would not sit. Naomi said, then I will love myself at full volume. He closed his eyes like a man choosing amputation. Adrian said, I will sign the annulment tonight. She felt grief and relief share a glass. Naomi said, we end this with dignity, not rumor. He nodded and set the pen down where the bracelet once gleamed. The city pulsed, and the storm inside them burned clean. Naomi faced the glass and did not flinch at her reflection. Dawn unspooled across the glass, and the contract waited like a quiet tide. Naomi stood at the table and felt the pages breathe. Adrian watched with a face built from control and ache. Naomi said, we finish what we started. He nodded once, as if agreement required surgery. The pen hovered between them like a blade softened by use. Adrian said, I will not take what was never freely given. Naomi said, I will not carry blame that was never mine. The city stretched and yawned, indifferent to vows and ledgers. He signed first, each stroke neat as a fence. She signed next, a signature that learned to stand alone. Adrian said, I wanted to build doors, not cages. Naomi said, then let me walk through without a guard. The papers settled, a soft sound louder than thunder. Silence arrived and sat like a witness who finally exhaled. Naomi said, I will keep the trust and my name. Adrian said, you will keep more than that if I can help. She gathered her sketchbook and left the bracelet sleeping. The morning light moved across the wood like a benediction. Naomi said, I will move out today, not to run, but to begin. Adrian said, I will inform legal and I will stay out of your way. Naomi felt grief and relief hold hands like uneasy kin. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and mended hope. Evelyn stirred tea as if sweetness could patch months of storms. Naomi set her suitcase down and felt the floor forgive her weight. Evelyn said, you are not a mistake. You are a direction. Naomi said, the annulment is signed. The words trembled, then held. Evelyn touched her cheek, and pride watered the room. Evelyn said, I am sorry for the papers I let near our table. Naomi said, we both did math with grief. They sat at the small table where bills once bred. Layla burst in with bolts of fabric like confetti built for healing. Layla said, we have orders waiting for a name. Naomi laughed, and the sound felt like a door unlocking. Naomi said, I want a studio, small and bright, with honest light. Evelyn said, we will paint the windowsills ourselves. The kettle sang, and the day agreed to be gentle. Naomi said, I will not hide from headlines. I will outwork them. Layla said, then let us begin, and let them watch us rise. Naomi opened her sketchbook, and a future woke up inside it. Evelyn said, your name will not whisper on tags, it will sing. Naomi traced a sleeve seam in pencil, steady and sure. She felt the room lift her like a hand under water. Layla said, I booked a pop-up. The city is hungry. The studio was a borrowed sunbox above a laundromat, windows wide and honest. Bolts of fabric leaned like patient friends waiting their turn. Naomi chalked lines on muslin and found her breath inside the geometry. Layla said, we need 3 gowns by Friday. Naomi said, then we cut today and pray with our hands. The doorbell chimed, and a courier delivered a machine wrapped in understatement. Naomi unboxed a top-line sewing beast with a note that held 6 words. The card read, "No strings, only stitches. Layla raised a brow that could slice doubt. Naomi said, "I will accept tools, not leashes." She threaded the needle and fed the cloth forward, fearless and precise. The machine purred like a road toward somewhere chosen. Naomi said, "This work is mine, even if he opened a door." Layla said, "Use the door, then build a house." The afternoons softened, and the dress took its first breath. Naomi pressed a seam and felt repair bloom where rupture once lived. 1. The city hummed below, washing machines keeping time like drums. Evelyn arrived with sandwiches and a prayer stitched quiet. Evelyn said, "I see your grandmother's hands in yours." Naomi said, "Then she can guide the hem tonight." She pinned a bodice and marked the future in chalk. Adrian met the board, under a sky that looked like tempered steel. Auditors stacked numbers that smelled like smoke and old fear. Adrian said, "We will disclose every payment and every pressure." The room shifted, unused to confession as a strategy. Cassandra attempted a smile that could not pass audit. Cassandra said, "This melodrama has costs." Adrian said, "So did the silence you engineered." Legal slid a termination letter across the glass, neat as winter. Cassandra's gaze cut, then dulled, then learned gravity. Adrian said, "We fund a program for young designers on our dime." He placed a folder labeled scholarship, no pictures, only math. Adrian said, "It will not carry my name." A director asked, "Whose name then?" Adrian said, "Hers, if she consents, or no name at all." The vote passed like a gate, unlocking in sequence. He exhaled for the first time since 19, and felt the air stay. Outside, the city answered with ordinary traffic and mercy. He wrote an email with no plea, only facts and an option. Adrian said, "The scholarship exists whether you bless it or burn it." He closed the laptop and let the future take its own legs. The skyline did not applaud, but it stopped pretending indifference. The studio smelled like steam and citrus cleaner when Adrian arrived unannounced. The sunset turned the windows into citrus and coal. Naomi stood amid mannequins that looked mid-breath. Adrian said, "I came to deliver a final signature." He placed a slim envelope beside a jar of chalk. Naomi said, "Then deliver it and go." He nodded, then paused, then let honesty walk in first. Adrian said, "There is a scholarship. It will run without my name." Naomi said, "It will run without mine as well." He swallowed and accepted the boundary like medicine. Adrian said, "I will buy the first gown you will never sell." Naomi said, "I do not sell to ghosts." He smiled once, brief and wrecked. Adrian said, "Then I will remain among the living and wait." Naomi said, "Do not wait for me to fix you." He said, "I will fix my house and leave your door alone." The city exhaled through the vents like a kinder weather. Naomi lifted her chin and returned to the seam that would not betray her. Layla peeked in and read the weather on their faces. Layla said, "We are closing in 10. The gowns are ahead of schedule." Adrian stepped back and let the room belong to work. Naomi said, "Thank you for the machine, and for not naming the gift." He said, "Thank you for teaching me where walls end." The pop-up space smelled like fresh paint and clean thunder after rain. Racks of finished gowns lined the walls like quiet hymns. Naomi traced a hem and felt her pulse find steady rhythm. Layla said, "Doors in 20, and the line wraps the block." Evelyn pressed her hands and blessed the room without words. Naomi said, "No ghosts, only work, only breath I own." She laid the last tag and let the truth settle like fabric. Outside, traffic coughed and then softened, as if the city listened. A courier slid an envelope under the door and backed away. Naomi said, "No more ambushes," and opened it anyway. Inside waited a small velvet pouch and a note with 10 clean words. Adrian wrote, "Return is not required. Freedom looks better on you. Naomi closed the pouch and chose not to look inside. The door opened, and the room filled like a lung. Music floated low, a heartbeat disguised as strings. Naomi greeted the first guest and felt her voice belong to itself. A teenager in a thrifted jacket touched a bodice like it might sing. Naomi said, "It does if you listen at the seam." Cameras hovered, hungry yet careful, learning new angles. Adrian appeared in the far corner, unannounced, unguarded, and still. He held no claim, only distance that respected the air she needed. Naomi nodded once and kept moving through the tide. Reporters asked about love, and she shifted the lens to work. Naomi said, "This room is my answer," and the hum agreed. Evelyn stood at the register like a lighthouse that never sleeps. Layla whispered counts and miracles, and the numbers chose joy. Cassandra arrived dressed like an apology that refused to kneel. Security hesitated, and then remembered the new rules. Cassandra said, "Investors want a ribbon cutting with him and with you." Naomi said, "This brand breathes without borrowed lungs." Cassandra lifted a glossy phone and flashed an old rumor draft. Naomi felt the room tilt, then hold like a ship that knows storms. Adrian stepped forward but stopped short, letting choice stay hers. Naomi said, "You ended when the ledger confessed. This ends too." Cassandra said, "You will miss the light without my hands." Naomi pointed at the crowd, at the work, at the living proof. Naomi said, "Light found me after you switched off the switch." Security opened the door and the wind took the rest. Cassandra left with a smile that finally understood weather. Evening leaned against the windows like a tired friend. Sail slips stacked into a small mountain that glowed. Naomi stepped outside for air that tasted like new keys. Adrian joined her with shoes that made no sound. He said, "I will not ask, but I will answer anything." Naomi said, "I wanted tenderness without debt." He said, "I want to learn it without a ledger." Silence sat between them, quiet and paid for. Naomi said, "I am not returning to a house that forgot my name." He said, "Then I will build one that remembers mine and my mercy." She almost laughed and did not, because the ache was kind now. Naomi said, "If we meet again, let it be at the work." He nodded, and the streetlights agreed to keep their distance. Inside, a dress turned on a hanger and caught slow gold. Closing time arrived like a soft verdict. The crowd thinned, leaving warmth folded into the air. Naomi found the velvet pouch again, and opened it at last. Inside lay the bracelet, unlatched, a circle refusing to close. Naomi said, "I refuse to close too," and set it in a donation jar. Evelyn wiped a proud tear, then laughed like the sun had manners. Layla said, "We sold out," and the words wore wings. Naomi turned the sign to closed and faced the quiet room. She whispered thanks to every seam that held. Outside, traffic hushed as if the city bowed. Naomi said, "I was sold once, now I sell only what I make." She switched off the lights and the darkness felt clean.